everybody. So today I'm going to show you how to make a baby beanie using the 22 needle Sentro. And here are the things that you will need. You need to have your Sentro, of course, and we are going to make sure that it's switched onto T. And then you need to make sure that you have the hook and a needle and a pair of scissors, and of course your yarn that you are going to be using. Before we get started, I want to talk to you guys about the types of yarn to use. Now these, I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the middle. These machines, I have found both in large and small sizes, they are very picky about what kind of yarn you use. And it can be hard to tell because you can use the same brand, just, you know, with maybe, sometimes it's just a different color. Sometimes it's a different, I don't know, there's differences in them, and it makes all the difference, and they are very picky about which ones you use. I have found that, of course, synthetic works best. However, you want to feel the texture of your yarn. So this one, I used these two yesterday. Now this one, I thought it was pretty soft, and it did work without causing any stitches to drop or any issues like that. However, it just wasn't a smooth ride. It was kind of getting stuck and snagging a little bit. So even though this is a soft yarn, this machine was still being picky about it, and it was getting snagged a little bit. No stitches were dropped, but it was getting snagged. Now this one is softer than the other one I just showed you. And this one worked like a charm. There were no snags. There was no, you know, it makes that horrible noise, that grinding noise because it's getting stuck. There was none of that. This yarn worked great. And, you know, sometimes yarns that have different colors, they don't work great. It just depends on the softness, the texture of it. And different brands make different yarns that work. So it just depends. You have to trial and error and take notes on which ones work with different brands and the colors as well, because it's sometimes color specific where this machine. Also, before I show you how to cast on, when you get your fresh yarn, sometimes it's hard to find, sometimes it's a little bit easier, but when you get your fresh skein of yarn, if you go inside a little belly button, and if you can find the end from the inside, this is way easier. Look, it just pulls right out. Way easier than unraveling it from the outside, and then your yarn is flopping all over the place, and you know, it just makes it so much easier to do it this way if you can. So luckily I was able to find it. Okay, so now we're ready to excuse me, cast on. And I like to have a pretty good amount of tail to work with because we're going to weave this back in. And this is going to be a beanie that has a brim, folded brim. I'm not a big fan of the ones that don't have a brim. They tend to roll up and it's just a mess. So anyways, starting on your first, your starting needle, you're just going to loop that like so. And then you're going to go behind the next one, then loop, then behind, then loop, and behind. And I tend to leave this pretty loose. You can see how much it's sticking out. I don't want it to be tight because when you make that brim, when you fold it over, you want these to have enough stretch to them where it is easier to loop them on, because otherwise it does become kind of annoying. And so you just keep going over, under kind of thing, you know, loop, then behind, loop, then behind. And then when you get back to your start, before you get to this one, right in between, you're going to pull it down through the feeder. And I have just been keeping it on the largest one. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. I've just been keeping it on the largest hole, just, you know, no friction or anything like that. With, you know, this yarn, this one is small enough where I could put it in the middle one, possibly even the smallest one. And it's just, all it's gonna do is create a tighter knit, and it's gonna possibly make it smaller. Now these are, of course, going to be for babies, infants, and things like that. So it's up to you on how tight of a knit you want. The tighter you go, though, of a knit, you do have to watch and be more careful of stitches being dropped, or if it snags and creates that awful noise. So, you know, just something to consider. So now that we have it threaded, we are going to, and now this one doesn't have any suction, so I will have to hold it in place. And we're going to slowly go ahead and do the first go around. And with these, because babies grow so fast, I really don't keep track of how many rows I'm doing. There's not a counter on this anyways. So that would be the first one. So we're gonna go ahead and do a second one, nice and slow, just to make sure that everything catches. But yeah, I don't keep track of how many rows I'm doing because babies grow so fast. And, you know, I just make different sized ones, and, you know, hopefully people will find the one that fits their baby's head best. Okay, so we are moving into the third. See, I've already lost track of how many, which is fine, because ultimately it doesn't matter. I'm probably gonna do 20 rows to start, and then I'll take a look at it and see if I like the size of that, and then go from there. You can always add more if you want. So I'm gonna go ahead and start going with that. Okay, so I'm just checking to see how I like the length. I'm just gonna pull this a little bit. Let's see. So I'm back at my starting needle. And I just kind of like to, you know, measure it because this will be folded in half. And so I'm just kind of trying to picture how wide that brim is going to be. So I think I'm gonna add just a few more and I'll get back with you. Okay, so let me loosen this a little bit. So now, yeah, I like this better. I like this length. So now we are going to form the brim. What you're gonna do is from the base of this needle with your finger on the underside, you're gonna run it down and follow this chain, this path, all the way to the end. Okay, and then you'll find the beginning, and you are going to take this very first loop, our cast on, and you're just gonna loop it. You might need to kind of hold it in place. Then you're gonna take the one right next to it and you're gonna loop that next one around. So basically we're just taking the ends of these. So you find the next one at the very end. And this may take practice if this is your first time, because they can sometimes be hard to see. But you're just going to take that very first loop. Let me pull this before this one goes down. There we go. And then this one goes on the next one. Okay, now that's held in place. And you keep this one going. You don't take this out. It's going to continue to feed through, and it's going to continue that knit as you fold these fold this over and hook these loops back onto the loom. And take your time with this. You don't have to rush. Even though, in all reality, these beanies, you could probably get one done every 10 to 15 minutes once you really get good at them, because they're tiny. They don't take a whole lot of yarn. And this machine is small, so it's a little bit easier to work with than the full size. Just keep going around. And you can start to see that brim forming, and it's so nice. It's nice and tucked in. It just looks more professional too. Has a more finished look about it. And because we cast on so loosely, it's just feeding on here way better, because there have been times where I've done it cast on tight and you have to start over because you can't hook it on properly. So we're just gonna feed it. Now this next one, so here's our starting again. This next go around, you don't want to race through it because sometimes it's just loaded with a lot of yarn, these hooks, and it can drop a stitch or snag just because they're a little bit extra loaded with yarn. And so just take your time with this. And I would say actually for the next 2 go arounds, and I just like to tuck these in. Yeah, see? And you just, if it snags, it's snagging here on the one that's coming up because it's too tight. It can't push through. So you just help it along and push that yarn down. And it should be all right. Okay, so now we're back and we're on the second go around. Again, don't rush. Do not rush. Go nice and slow. Oh, look what happened. So it did drop a stitch. So this is where your hook comes in. This is not always gonna work. Sometimes it's hard to figure out. Sometimes I don't do something right. And it just doesn't quite work. So I'm gonna just check and make sure the rest of them did just fine. And I believe so. So yeah, we'll just continue on and just keep an eye out. But once it gets past that second go around, usually it should be good after that. And we need to watch this one as it comes back around because it was dropped. It has a chance of dropping again because it's not set just right. And all I did to fix that, by the way, was just trying to take that loop and put it back over, but it's typically not the same one. So I believe this was our loop. And I think we're good. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't do it right. I'm not exactly a professional. This is something that I do for fun because I enjoy it. But, you know, things happen and that's okay. You just work with what you got sometimes. I think we're past the red zone area where stitches can be dropped easily. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this, and I'm probably going to do another 20 or so stitches, or not stitches, excuse me, 20 or so rows. Before I do that, I just want to double check that everything is latched and nothing's going to come unraveled. There's nothing more frustrating than when you get way far along in your project and all of a sudden there's a row that's just completely unraveling all the way down to the very end and you have to start all over. So, you know, just try to catch it as early as possible. And I think we're good. Everything looks, with that one drop stitch, just, you know, everything looks like it's knitted back in. So I'm gonna do my next rows and I'll see you in just a sec. Okay, so I think I'm done and it's time to cast off. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna unhook this. And again, I typically like to have quite a bit of tail to work with. It's just my preference. If you prefer to work with a smaller amount, that's totally up to you. But it just makes it easier for me because once we cast off, you have to be careful. You have to be careful and not let the loops fall off, or else it can be a huge disaster in the end, where it just comes unraveled. So next you are going to need your needle, and we're going to pop this out, and I like to let it loop around my last one, and I'm just gonna hold it in place, and we're gonna go around one time. That is it. So keep your eye on where that string is coming from, because you'll want to stop before you start unhooking all of them. So I'm going to stop here. These will, you know, go through the same process, but I'm going to stop here because all of these from this one on are not hooked on. They're just kind of hanging there. So what we have to do is take this tail, and we need to thread it through all of those. We need to thread it through so that they don't come undone. So I just kind of take the end of the needle and I run it through the two pegs and pull that yarn through, and then go to the next one. Eventually these it'll, you know, start coming off, and you can pull the yarn a little bit and tighten it, just so it's a little bit easier. But for now, I just keep it on there like this, just because it helps hold it in place a little bit better while I get it started. This is the most tedious part of this project, and you'll want to be very careful to not let any of these come off before you've looped your yarn through, because otherwise your project will just completely come unraveled, and it'll be so upsetting and disappointing. Especially if the project went pretty well without too many issues. See how it's, you know, starting to come off? That's totally fine. And I just kind of give it a little tug just to tighten it up and give myself a little bit more yarn to work with as I loop through the rest of these. Okay, so now we're at a pretty good point where I can move the rest of these around. So I'm going to just go ahead and do that. And I'm going to bring these closer to me. I'm going to stop here before this one comes up, because again, if this comes up, this needle, it's going to push this off. So you definitely don't want to do that. There we go. Get in there. All right. And I'm just going to turn it so that these are closer to me again. I'm just pulling that yarn, cinching it a little bit tighter every time. And the last one. And there we go. Look at that. So now we can move this out of the way. And this is what the outside looks like so far. So you see how this is rolling down and unfinished. So, and we have this tail sticking out as well. So let's go ahead. We need to flip it inside out. And you're going to pull the string through. Leave this one. This is the one tail that we started with. Leave this one alone for now. We want to finish this off first. So I'm just kind of going around and making sure it's not rolled up. If it's too rolled up and you pull it, it gets caught and trapped, and it can kind of do like weird things. And when you flip it inside out, it's just got weird stuff happening. So definitely take some time to keep it neat, and you know, push it and unroll it as you pull that yarn. And you see how now when you pull it tight, it all closes up together. Okay, so that's perfect. It won't stay like that. As when you mess with it, it'll loosen. So that's fine. We just need to make sure it stays nice and tight. And you are going to kind of weave it through that top part. And I don't tend to spend too much time doing that weaving part because it just doesn't hold. I just get right down to it and tie it off. So I'm just gonna kind of weave this right here. Get in there. There we go. And I'm just gonna create this loop, and I'm gonna just bring that yarn through like 3 times, and then you push that yarn down, pull, okay, and that's your first knot. I tend to do 2 or 3, just depending on how well it goes through and how well it's going to seem to hold. Different yarns behave differently. Some tie better than others. So sometimes you just got to do a little bit of extra for it. Okay, so again, I'm going to create a nice little loop, and I'm going to go through this loop 3 times. And I'm gonna, once again, push those knots down, pull the yarn nice and tight, and I'm just gonna weave this through so it's not sticking out. Oh, see, look, it came out. So I'm gonna do one more because it came out, or loosened, I guess. So I'm gonna do one more tie, and 1, 2, 3, and push it down, pull real tight. Just kind of weave that end through Whoa. Okay, and now you can use your scissors to cut the end. There we go. These scissors are not sharp, by the way, so. Okay, so now we have cut this end off. We don't need that. And now we need to address this end. And this is a pretty simple process. I don't waste my time with making any knots or tying. You can, if you want to, do the same type of tie that I did up here. But there's just no point. This is woven in. It won't come undone. And especially after you weave this tail back in, there shouldn't be any issues. So, along this edge, try to make sure it's not going through, because you're going to mess up the pattern on the other side. I just take these top these top pieces, knits, excuse me, these top knits, and I just wrap it around, and that's it. And I'm not pulling hard or anything like that. There's no need to, because then it's gonna tighten around the, it won't make it as stretchy. So no need to do that. You just kind of loop it through. And it doesn't matter which one, just whichever one is right there at the top. If you want to loop it through two, like what I just did, you can loop it through two. And you just keep moving around. Don't pull tight. And then this is it. Yep, you just wrap this yarn around. And when you get back to the beginning, that's where you'll stop. And anything that's left over, we'll cut, we'll trim, whatever is necessary. Don't pull hard, just keep this nice and easy, light-handed. Okay, so there we go. And then this, we will just trim. And then we flip it. Outside in. And it is done. And there you go. And it's nice and soft. It's nice and stretchy. And if you wanted to add a pom-pom on top, you can still do that at the end. If you wanted to knit a bow and add a bow, you can do that. But this is just the basic beanie.